I will begin with the letter, because that is where it began for her. For me, it had begun 7 years earlier, on an evening in April when I was 29 and she was 19, and we were introduced at a subscription concert in a room above a bookshop in Holborn. Not a fashionable room, not a room where anyone with my title had any particular reason to be, which is precisely why I was there. I had gone because the program listed a piece of chamber music I had been attempting to locate for 2 years, and she had gone because her father was a solicitor who believed that serious music was the most democratic of pleasures, and had brought his daughter as a matter of principle. She was seated 2 rows ahead of me. She had a small notebook in her lap. During the performance, a string quartet, very fine, the piece I had come for in the second half, she wrote in the notebook, and I watched her write, and afterward I was able to tell you nothing about the music that I did not already know from the program because I had spent the entire evening watching a woman take notes with the attention of someone who has decided that the world deserves to be recorded accurately. I introduced myself during the interval. Her father was speaking to another solicitor, and she was standing slightly apart, reading what she had written, and she looked up when I spoke and said, without any of the adjustment that most people make when they learn my title, "I am Miss Rowena Vale. Were you listening to the second violin or the cello in the first movement?" I thought the second violin was doing something unusual, and I wanted to know if someone else heard it. I had heard it. We discussed it for 11 minutes, which I know because I counted. Then her father returned and we were properly introduced, and I shook the solicitor's hand and said something appropriate, and they left. And I went back to my seat for the second half and heard almost nothing. And I drove home to Stormwell House through the April streets and sat in the library for an hour doing nothing, which was not a thing I did. I should tell you what I am, so that this account has the correct dimensions. My name is Caspian Vane. I am the Duke of Stormwell. I have held the title since I was 24, when my father died of an illness that moved quickly, and in the 5 years between inheriting and meeting Rowena Vale, I had managed to acquire a reputation for coldness that was not entirely unearned. I was not cruel. I was simply precise. I said what I meant and nothing more, which in certain drawing rooms reads as warmth and in others reads as frost, and London drawing rooms had generally settled on frost. I did not, in the ordinary run of things, fall in love. I had not done it before. I had no particular framework for understanding what had happened to me in a room above a Holborn bookshop, and for approximately a fortnight I treated it as an anomaly to be observed and categorized rather than an event to be acted upon. Then I saw her again at a dinner, and she was talking about the concert to the woman beside her, and she laughed at something, a real laugh, not a performance. And I understood that it was not an anomaly, and that I had no intention of categorizing it, and that I was in very serious trouble. I spent 7 years in that trouble. I want you to understand what 7 years means. It means 23 dinners at which I contrived to be seated within conversational range. It means 14 concerts and 4 lectures and 2 winter assemblies, and 1 very long garden party in Kensington, at which I stood near the rose arbor for 2 hours, because she had mentioned once that she liked roses, and I thought, I hoped, she might walk that way. It means watching her become, over 7 years, more entirely herself than she had been at 19. Sharper, warmer, more settled in her own opinions, more certain of her own worth, which had always been considerable and which she had taken some years to fully believe in. It also means watching, in the 5th year, a man named Gideon Alcott begin to court her. I should be fair about Alcott. He was not a villain. He was a perfectly reasonable man, a younger son of a baronet, good-looking in an ordinary way, pleasant at dinner, attentive in the manner of a man who has decided to be attentive and is applying himself. He had no apparent malice. He had, as far as I could observe, a genuine liking for Rowena, which was enough to make me dislike him almost beyond my capacity to manage. She liked him back. This was clear within the first season of his attention. She did not love him. I do not think she loved him, though I concede I may not be the most objective observer, but she liked him, and he was consistent, and she was 24 and society had opinions about women of 24 and she had perhaps begun to listen to them in a way she hadn't at 19. And I had said nothing. 7 years and I had said nothing. I had reasons. They were not good reasons, but they were numerous. I was a duke and she was a solicitor's daughter, and the distance between those two things was, in the world we both moved through, considered to be a specific and significant kind of distance. I was also, at the time Alcott appeared, not entirely certain that she felt anything for me beyond the collegial warmth of a woman who finds someone interesting to talk to at dinners. I have never been able to endure the idea of saying a thing and being wrong about it. So I said nothing, and Alcott proposed in the spring of the 6th year, and she accepted, and I sat in my library at Stormwell House for a very long evening and did not move. The wedding was set for the following May, a Saturday. I knew the date because all of London knew the date. It was the event of the season, the solicitor's daughter marrying extremely well, the church booked and the breakfast arranged and the flowers ordered, and I knew the details because knowing them was a form of discipline, the way a man studies a wound to understand it rather than simply enduring it. The church was St. Aldrich's in Mayfair. It was also my parish church. I had been attending services there for 11 years and had no intention of changing. If there was something bleak about this, about the fact that the church where I went every Sunday morning was the church where she would marry someone else, I did not allow myself to examine it too closely. I told myself I would not attend the wedding. This lasted until approximately 8 o'clock on the morning of the wedding, when I put on my coat and walked to St. Aldrich's and sat in the last pew. The letter arrived at her house at 8:30. I did not know this at the time. I learned it later from her father, who told me everything in a single sitting 3 days after the wedding that did not happen, in a voice that was very controlled and very cold, which I understood completely. What he told me was this: Alcott had written the letter the night before, having decided, after 2 years of engagement, that he was not, after all, the marrying kind, which is a phrase that covers a considerable amount of ground and which I will leave without further examination. The letter was delivered to Rowena's dressing room at 8:30 while her maid was arranging her hair, and Rowena read it and then sat very still for approximately 3 minutes and then said, "We will need to tell the church." And her maid said, "Miss, you cannot go to the church." And Rowena said, "My father and the guests are already there. I will not send a message. I will go and explain myself." And she went. I was in the last pew when she walked in. The cathedral was full, 400 people, the morning light coming through the high windows in long gold columns, the flowers everywhere, white and pale green, the smell of them very strong. The organ was playing quietly. People were talking in the low voices of a congregation waiting for something to begin. She walked up the aisle. She was in her wedding gown, silk, very pale, with a veil she had not put up yet, and she walked as she always walked, with the particular uprightness of a woman who has decided that her posture is the one thing entirely within her own control. And she got to the front of the cathedral and she stood, and she looked at the altar, and the organ kept playing, and the congregation had begun to notice that something was wrong, and she turned to face them. I cannot tell you what her expression was. I have tried in the months since to describe it to myself, and the closest I can come is, entirely without performance. She was not weeping. She was not angry. She had gone somewhere inside herself that was very quiet and very clear, and from that place she said, in a voice that carried to the back of the cathedral because she had not tried to make it carry but simply spoke, "I am sorry for any inconvenience. There will not be a wedding this morning. Please do not feel that you must stay." The cathedral went silent, 400 people and not one sound. She turned back toward the altar, as though she needed a moment that had nothing to do with the congregation, and I saw her shoulders drop, not in defeat, just in the release of having said the necessary thing, and then she straightened again, and I saw her prepare herself to walk back down the aisle, and I thought, no. I stood up. I want to be clear about what I understood in that moment. I understood that I was about to do something that 400 people were going to witness and discuss for the remainder of the season. I understood that Rowena Vale had just been abandoned at the altar, and that she had not asked for anything from anyone, and that what I was about to do might not be wanted. I understood that 7 years of silence was about to become a very public act, and that if she looked at me and shook her head, I would have to walk back to the last pew and sit down, and it would be the most difficult thing I had ever done. I understood all of this. I stood up anyway. I walked from the last pew to the altar. It is not a short walk in St. Aldrich's. I was aware of every person watching. I was aware of the sound my footsteps made on the stone floor in the absolute silence of 400 people who had stopped breathing. I was aware, as I got closer, that Rowena had heard me and had turned, and that she was watching me come toward her with an expression I had never seen on her face before, not quite hope, not quite fear, something that contained both of them and had not yet resolved into either. I stopped in front of her. I was aware of the altar behind her and the flowers and the morning light and the 400 people, and none of it was as present to me as the fact that she was looking at me and waiting, and I had 7 years of things to say and approximately 10 seconds to say them. I offered her my hand. I said, "Miss Vale, if you have no particular plans for this morning, I would be very glad of your company." She looked at my hand. She looked at my face. She said, "Your Grace," which was not a yes, but which was also, I thought, not a no. "I have been in the last pew," I said, "every Sunday for 11 years. I was in the last pew on the evening of a subscription concert in Holborn 7 years ago when you were taking notes on the second violin. I have not said anything in 7 years because I was not certain it would be welcome. I am saying it now because—" I stopped. The cathedral was so quiet I could hear the candles. "Because I believe it is better to be wrong about this than to let you walk back down this aisle alone. And I do not think I am wrong." She was very still. Behind her, the flowers were very white, and the morning light fell on her veil, and the cathedral was silent enough that I could hear someone in the congregation make a small, involuntary sound, not unkind, just the sound of 400 people collectively holding something in. "You have been in the last pew for 11 years, she said. "Yes." "Every Sunday?" "Yes." "And the concert," she said, "you came for the second movement." "I came for the chamber piece in the second half," I said. "I stayed for the second violin." She looked at me for a long moment, then she took my hand. The sound that went through the cathedral was not quite a gasp. It was more like the collective release of breath by 400 people who had been holding it. Someone, I believe it was an elderly woman in the 3rd row, began to cry, which I found later, when Rowena told me, to be one of the more affecting details of the morning. We walked down the aisle together. People moved aside, not because they were required to, but because it was the only natural response to two people walking with the particular certainty of something that has been a very long time arriving and has finally, precisely, arrived. Her father was standing at the door. I had met him a dozen times over 7 years, dinners, assemblies, the concerts he attended out of principle. He was a careful man, a precise man, a man who had raised a daughter on the belief that precision was a form of respect. He looked at me, and then at Rowena's hand in mine, and something moved through his face that was not uncomplicated. "Your Grace," he said. "Mr. Vale," I said, "I should have spoken to you first. I am aware of that. I apologize for the disorder." He looked at Rowena. "Papa," she said, "just that." He looked at her for a long moment, and then he looked at me and he said, "Come to dinner, Tuesday. We will discuss the matter properly." Then he walked past us into the cathedral to speak to the guests, and Rowena made a sound that was partly a laugh and mostly something else, and I held her hand more firmly, and we stood in the doorway of St. Aldrich's with the May morning light on the steps and the city carrying on around us as though nothing particular had happened, which is the city's great and constant indifference. 7 years, she said, when we had been standing there long enough for the first wave of guests to begin leaving. Yes, I said. You might have said something. I know. At the concert, or the first dinner, or at any point in the intervening. I know, I said, I was wrong to wait. I have a list of reasons that are not good reasons, if you would like to hear them. Later, she said, not here. We walked. I did not have a destination and she did not suggest one. We simply walked in the May morning through streets that were not particularly interested in us, and she still had the veil pinned to her hair because there had not been a moment to remove it and I did not mention this, and we walked for approximately 20 minutes before she said, without preamble, "Were you going to say anything? If he hadn't sent the letter, if the wedding had happened?" I considered this. The honest answer was the only answer. No, I said. She was quiet. I had decided, I said, that your happiness was more important than what I felt. That if you had chosen him and were content, then saying anything would only serve my own purposes at the cost of yours, and I was not going to do that. That is a very noble reason to make a unilateral decision about someone else's life, she said. Yes, I said, it is also a coward's reason dressed in noble clothes. Both things are true. She stopped walking. We were in a quiet street, not fashionable, not unfashionable, the kind of London street that simply exists and gets on with it, and she turned to look at me. 7 years, she said again, but differently this time. Not accusation, something else. Yes, I said. The subscription concert. You came for the chamber piece. Yes, you were taking notes. I take notes everywhere, she said. I have notebooks going back 15 years. I would have noted you, the Duke in the third row who heard the second violin. I would have written it down. She looked at me steadily. I think I did write it down. Something moved in my chest. Did you? I would have to check, she said. I have a great many notebooks. I looked at her. She looked at me. The May light was on her face and the veil was still in her hair, and she had been abandoned at the altar 3 hours ago by a man who did not deserve her, and she was standing in a quiet London street discussing the provenance of a 7-year-old notebook entry with a composure that I found in that moment to be the most extraordinary thing about a woman who was full of extraordinary things. Miss Vale, I said. Yes, she said. I would like, if it is acceptable to you, to say the things I should have said 7 years ago. Not all of them at once. That would be excessive, but in the correct order over whatever time you require until they have all been said. She considered this. That seems reasonable, she said. I should also like, I said, to call on your father on Tuesday and to mean something specific by it. He will ask you why you waited 7 years, she said. I know, I said. I have been practicing the answer. What is it? That I was wrong, I said. That I mistook discipline for consideration and silence for selflessness, and that neither of those is true, and that I intend to spend whatever time he grants me making a better argument. A pause. And also that I am the Duke of Stormwell and I have loved his daughter since she was 19 years old, and that I would like his permission to say so to her, properly, in a setting that is less eventful. She laughed. It was the laugh I had heard across a dinner table 7 years ago, real, unguarded, with surprise in it. This morning has been extremely eventful, she said. Yes, I said. I apologize for my contribution to that. You walked the length of St. Aldrich's in front of 400 people, she said. I did. That is not nothing, she said. No, I said, it is not. It is, I think, approximately 7 years' worth of things that should have been said sooner, compressed into a single act. I looked at her. I hope it was sufficient. She looked back at me for a long moment. The look I recognized from 7 years of dinners and concerts. the look of a woman taking careful notes on something she intends to understand properly. "Check back with me in a year," she said. "I'll tell you then." Dinner on Tuesday was, as predicted, not easy. Her father was a solicitor who had spent 30 years asking difficult questions in difficult rooms, and he asked them, why had I waited? What I had intended by attending the wedding? Whether I had known Alcott would send the letter? Whether my appearance at the altar had been, in any way, calculated? I answered each question directly. The first, because I was wrong and afraid of being wrong, which are not the same thing but which I had allowed myself to conflate. The second, I had not known, and if the wedding had proceeded I would have sat in the last pew and watched and said nothing, which was not a thing I was proud of. The third, I had not known, I would not have wanted to know. The fourth, it had not been calculated. Nothing about that morning had been calculated. It had been 7 years of something finally arriving at its natural conclusion, and I was aware this was not a sufficient legal defense, but it was the truth. He listened. He asked 3 more questions. He sat with the answers for a while, in the way of a man who has learned patience as a professional skill. Then he said, "She is not a woman to be managed, Your Grace." And I said, "I know, I would not want to manage her, I want to talk to her. I have wanted to talk to her for 7 years and been an idiot about it." And he was quiet for a moment longer, and then he said, "Tuesday fortnight. Come again then." I came on Tuesday fortnight, and the fortnight after, and the one after that. What happened in those weeks is not dramatic in the way that mornings in cathedrals are dramatic. It was quiet and careful, and on her part characteristically precise. She had questions. She asked them. I had answers. I gave them. We walked in the park twice, chaperoned, and argued about a book she was reading, and I was wrong about the ending and told her so, which she said was an improvement over 7 years of silence. She found the notebook, the one from the subscription concert. She brought it on the 4th visit and opened it to the correct page, and there in her small, clear hand was a note about the 2nd violin, and beneath it, "Duke of Stormwell, 3rd row, heard it, stayed for all of it." That was all, but she had written it down. I proposed properly in June, in her father's drawing room, with her father's prior knowledge and his slightly grudging permission, and a ring that had been in the Stormwell family for 4 generations, and which I had carried in my coat pocket for 3 weeks before I found the right moment, which turned out to be a Tuesday afternoon when we had run out of arguments about the book, and the room was very quiet, and she was looking out the window at the street with an expression I had learned to recognize as thinking rather than unhappy, and I said her name, and she turned, and I said what I had been waiting 7 years to say, correctly and in the right order, and then I said, "Will you?" And she said yes before I finished the sentence, in the manner of a woman who has already made up her mind and sees no reason to wait for the formality. We were married in August. Small ceremony, her father's insistence and mine and hers. St. Aldrich's again, which was perhaps inevitable. The same morning light through the same windows. Different flowers, she chose them herself. Late summer, very vivid, nothing like the pale May arrangements of someone else's wedding. I stood at the altar this time. She walked to me. Her father gave her his arm and walked her down the aisle that she had walked alone in May. And when he brought her to me, he held her hand for a moment before placing it in mine, and he said nothing, which was a full sentence. There were perhaps 40 people. Several of them were the same 40 who had been among the 400 in May, and I was aware of this, and I was glad of it, glad that they could see the ending that the morning in May had promised. She looked at me as we said what needed to be said. Directly, in the way she looked at everything, not performing the emotion but simply being in it, the way she had always been in everything, entirely present, entirely herself. Afterward on the steps, in the August light, she said, "I have been thinking about something." "What?" I said. "You said, in the cathedral in May, that you had been in the last pew every Sunday for 11 years. "I did," I said. "And the concert was 7 years ago." "Yes." So you were in the last pew for 4 years before we met. Yes, I said. She considered this. And then we met and you kept coming. Yes. Were you aware, she said, that I attended the morning service at St. Aldrich's for approximately 3 years before you spoke to me in the cathedral in May? I looked at her. My father's church is too far, she said pleasantly. St. Aldrich's is closer. I have been attending let me think, since the autumn 4 years ago. I sit in the 4th row. I have a notebook. I thought about this for a moment. You have been in the 4th row. For 4 years. While I was in the last pew. Yes, she said, I noted you several times. I was waiting to see what you would do. She looked at me with the expression I had known for 7 years, the careful, attentive expression of a woman who intends to understand things accurately. You did nothing for 4 years. I didn't know you were there, I said. I know, she said. That is what I have been thinking about. You were watching me for 7 years and you missed me entirely for 4 of them. She paused. You are a man with certain limitations of observation. Yes, I said. I have noted this, she said, in the notebook. I laughed. She smiled, not the small, careful smile, the real one, the one I had heard across dinner tables and now had the extraordinary privilege of seeing from very close range. And it was, as it had always been, the best thing in the room. I will try, I said, to observe more carefully. You have been observing me for 7 years, she said. You may now simply look. We went home, not to Stormwell House, to the smaller house in Kensington that we had decided on together, which had a garden and a room she had claimed for her notebooks and windows that let in the morning light in a way she had specified before we signed anything. In the evening we sat in the drawing room with the August light going gold through the windows, and she was reading, and I was not reading. I was watching her read, which I had done for 7 years from the wrong distance, and which I intended to do from the correct distance for the rest of my life. She looked up after a while. You are watching me read, she said. Yes, I said. You have always watched me read, she said. Yes, I said. You may continue, she said, and went back to her book. And outside the August evening carried on, and the garden was very green, and somewhere in a drawer in the room full of notebooks was one that said Duke of Stormwell, 3rd row. Heard it. Stayed for all of it. I heard it, I stayed. That in the end is all of it.